Wary adventurers in the world of Dungeons & Dragons need a place to stay when visiting a new town or shire. So we are going to build an inn for our campaign using our good old foam core. I cut out a 9-inch by 6-inch base and some 6-inch by 4-inch walls for the lower story, then an 8 by 6 base and 8-inch long walls and 6-inch wide gable end walls for the upper floor. These walls are all 2 inches high, which makes them 10 feet tall in D&D Game World, which is not really to scale, but it makes the building look more appealing. I carved the door, window, and stone details into the walls before assembling them. Assembly is done with white glue and straight pins. I then attached the lower walls to the underside of the upper floor. When attaching the walls this way, make sure your wall details are upside down. The next step was to build the interior of the lower floor, which will be playable by removing the upper section. I drew a floor plan with a fireplace, an entryway, a storage room, and a staircase to the upper floor. Assembly was slow because I did a lot of figuring out on the fly because plans changed as I was building the interior features. Making the fireplace was pretty straightforward since I had built a few before and already had a design in mind. But the stairs changed. I originally was going to have an overhang with a pillar and a handrail, but I decided against it as it would make it more difficult to move minis around on the floor, so I just cut the bottom at a slope to match the stairs themselves. After carving the wood floor planks, I glued the interior pieces into place and set the lower floor aside to dry. Next was to build the second story. Now I didn't want the second story floor to be permanent because I want to use this building for other things, like a manor or a house or a library or things like that. So if my adventurers go upstairs, I'll just use my modular floor tiles to set out a floor for whatever that encounter is. I was originally going to use foam core for the roof, but decided to use cereal box or pizza box cardstock instead. No particular reason for this, I just wasn't feeling the foam core for the roof and wanted to do something different. For the wood beams and detail pieces, I started cutting out various lengths of pink insulation foam. Everything from 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch to 1/16 inch thick by 1/8 inch wide. Once I had several of these pieces, I textured them using a wire brush. I then started cutting them down to size for the beams I needed, just eyeballing it. One strip gave me 12 pieces, which was just what I needed for the outside beams. I then started gluing them onto the end. Some pieces were shorter and some a little longer, which is fine for the support beams as it adds some variety and gives it a hand-hewn look. The thinner pieces were used for the boards on the siding and once again was attached with white glue and straight pins. The chimney for the fireplace is built from foam core. I did some rough measurements, but mostly eyeballed the pieces so they would fit against the back of the building nice and snug. This required a lot of fine cutting and adjustments, including cutting out a notch in the roof. And notice that I left an empty space in the beams on the back for the chimney to fit in. After carving the brick pattern into the chimney, I glued it to the upper section of the inn using white glue and straight pins to hold it in place, and it could then fit nicely on top of the fireplace. With the major details of the building complete, it was time to move on to the roof. For the shingles, I went back to my pink insulation foam and decided to try something that I'd been thinking about. I cut out a hand-cut shingle pattern into a 1-inch thick length of foam on my hot wire cutter, varying the depth of each shingle, but leaving a solid strip at one edge. And then after texturing one side with a wire brush, I sliced a thin piece off of the thicker piece. After repeating this texturing and slicing several times, I had a bunch of shingle strips to cover the roof with. I applied the strips of shingles to the cardstock with hot glue so I could work fast and not have to wait for the glue to dry before moving on. A couple things to notice here. I've added some detail pieces to the building, including beams under the roofline and window frames, and I staggered the shingles to avoid them looking repetitive. I wasn't thrilled with the texture of the shingles in this method, but the application process is by far the easiest I have found, and the variety in the shingles looks fantastic. To finish off the details of the building, I added some fascia boards to cover up the edge of the shingles. With the construction of the inn complete, it was time to get ready to paint. To start the paint, I covered the entire project in a base coat that was a mixture of black paint and modpodge. Be sure to slop this on good and thick, as it will protect the piece, fill in the cracks and grooves with black, and provide a good tooth for the paint to stick to. I started the paint color with a medium gray on all the stone and brick surfaces. For small, hard-to-reach areas, I switched to a smaller brush to avoid getting gray on the wood pieces. I then painted some individual stones on the lower walls, chimney, and fireplace with various shades of gray, mixed with browns, reds, and a little black. For the plaster stucco on the top level, I like this parchment-colored paint mixed with a tiny bit of yellow. It gives a nice bright shade, and while it might look a little too bright now, the black wash later on will calm this down and give it a nice dirty aesthetic. I started painting the wood with the floor and stairs on the interior piece with a medium to dark brown right from the bottle. Mixing in a little burnt umber to the brown, I started in on all the posts, beams, window frames, doors, and boards on the exterior. Now this is a pretty tedious task, but take your time and be careful so as not to get any brown paint on the stonework or the stucco siding. To paint the roof, I started with a little bit of burnt umber, then a good portion of medium brown. And then I added just a couple drops of yellow. This made a nice warm medium brown color to differentiate the roof from the rest of the wood. To finish off the bottom floor, I mixed some olive green and brown to paint the ground outside of the inn. Also notice that I painted the hearth of the fireplace on the inside with red bricks. A couple more details on the door straps painted with gunmetal, and then it was time to start the black wash. Some people like to use inks or pigments to make their black wash, but I just like good old black craft paint watered down thoroughly and applied liberally. Once the black wash was dry, it was time for the last paint step. A good dry brushing with a very light brown mixed with a little yellow and white, and this changed my mind about the results of the wire brushing on the roof. It looked great. Dry brushing was applied to the rest of the building, and then the paint was complete. But that's not the end of this project. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to see how I take this inn to the next level, adding flocking to the roof, gravel for the ground outside, building additional pieces to make it more versatile, and adding lighting effects. Give us a like if you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.